Isn't it about time that you got out of the waiting room? Hello again, everyone. I'm Eli's dad with Project Eli, where we educate, lead, and inspire. And today, I'm going to rant. Why am I going to rant? Well, I just recently had a doctor's appointment. I just had my 1-year anniversary for having my hip replaced. Eli, that happens to you when you get older. Anyway, it was my 1-year anniversary, and the doctor wanted to take a look and see how everything was progressing. So I get to my appointment, and I have a strategy, of course. My strategy is to get to the doctor's office early, because if you go early, then chances are you don't have to wait so long in the waiting room, because hopefully the doctor will be there on time and you can get in and out relatively quickly. So I get there early and I look in the waiting room, and there's already 10 people in there ahead of me. 10. And I don't see anybody coming out. I still see people coming in. I couldn't help but notice how the waiting room in the doctor's office is a lot like the waiting room in life. So let's talk about a few of those things, all right? Let's talk about my experience in the waiting room, and you'll see what I'm talking about, all right? First of all, this was, like I said, for the orthopedic guy. So virtually everybody that was sitting there, of the 10 people, were older. As a matter of fact, that was a good thing, because it made me feel kind of young. Most of the people in there were older than I. And one of my things that I've mentioned before is that, Eli, you and your generation, I'm going to blame you, Eli, you and your generation spend so much time looking at your phones, sticking your face in the phone. Well, shut my big mouth, because when I looked around the waiting room, there were 7 people out of 10. 7 out of 10 had their heads in their phones. And once again, these are people that are my age or even older. So I walk up to the desk like you're supposed to do when you check in, and the woman says, a real young woman, says to me, "So which doctor are you here to see?" And I say, "Oh, doctor? I just came in to read the magazines." Nothing. Not a smile, nothing. I'm going to have to change my jokes. I did notice that one of the older nurses in the back did laugh. All right, so I know the joke is still funny. I guess I have a generation problem with my material. Anyway, I went in, I told her my doctor's name, I sat down, I look around, once again I see 7 out of 10 people with their heads in their phones, and 2 of the people, there's a couple, a husband and a wife, sitting there, and the wife is there filling out paperwork like you sometimes have to do in the doctor's office. She goes up, she hands the paperwork to the lady at the desk, and then she grabs the phone and she starts looking at the phone. So I don't know whether 7 out of 10 is right, maybe it's 8 out of 10, okay? Anyway, I'm sitting there in the doctor's office, and years ago, Eli, you know, before there were cell phones and people sticking their noses into them all the time, there used to be magazines in the doctor's office. One of the things that I preach to you and everybody else is that to make quality time out of quantity time. So what did I used to do when I was in the waiting room? Well, I would go over to the magazines, and they never had, you know, Sport or Sports Illustrated or so on. You know, when if they did have Sports Illustrated, somebody else was already reading it. Those are the ones I want to read. So to make quality time out of quantity time, I would go over and I would grab the Cosmopolitan magazine, and I would always read, "Can this marriage be saved?" There was always had an article in Cosmo about, "Can this marriage be saved?" And I read it to try and learn something. Apparently it wasn't that good. As you know, I've been divorced twice, so maybe I should have spent more time in doctor's offices, I don't know. But in addition to people sticking their noses in their phones, they also had a TV. And on the TV, I look and I see people are working on repairing a house, you know, they're painting, so on and so forth. And I'm looking at it, and my first thought is there anything more boring than watching paint dry? And I came up with an answer. Yes, there is. It's watching somebody else's paint dry. All right, I took a look at the TV, and in the bottom it said HGTV. And I didn't know what HGTV stood for, so I turned to the woman next to me, needless to say, an older lady, and I said, "What's HGTV?" And she said, "Oh, that's House and Garden." And I made the comment to her about, you know, how boring it is to watch somebody else's paint dry, and she gave me a little bit of a laugh. And then the lady next to me is sitting down, and she looks over at me and she says, "You know, I'm looking at my phone, but I am making quality time out of quantity time," because I had mentioned this to the other lady about how doctor's offices, everybody's got their head in their phone. And she said, "I'm shopping." I said, "Okay, well, good for you." And then we started a conversation because, as it turns out, she was here, she heard which doctor I was coming to see, and she was going to see the same doctor. Now, her appointment was an hour earlier than mine, which was kind of depressing news for me, because if she hasn't been seen yet, I'm going to be sitting here probably for another hour. So she starts a conversation with me, a really, really nice lady, make no mistake about it. And she's talking to me, and she says, "You know, I'm here for my 1-year anniversary also. And I was the very first patient that the doctor saw after he recovered from his back surgery." Okay, see, our operations were postponed because the actual doctor doing the operation had emergency back surgery himself. So I had an extra month to be in major discomfort with my hip. But in any case, so this lady and I are talking, and she's telling me, you know, about her family and about the doctors, and she's a nurse, and that she's 42 years old. She told me that 3 times. And if I was in a waiting room with people that had, you know, looking at articles, you know, looking for advertisements for funeral homes, I probably would mention that I was 42 years old too a few times. So anyway, she and I are talking, and what happens is when you have something in common, Eli, it's easy to start a conversation. It's a good thing to have those kind of skills. So keep in mind, when you do want to talk with somebody, find something that you have in common, and then you bond together. And really good proof of this is, let's say you're going on a trip and you go someplace, let's say you're going overseas, you know, you're going to England, you're going to France or whatever, and you see somebody else that's an American, and you say, "Are you an American?" "Yeah, I am too." "Well, you know, you got to go to this restaurant, or you got to go to that museum," and you'll take their word for it. Why? Because they're the same as you. Now, you may live in New York, and they may live in California, and you wouldn't pay attention to them, and even give them a second glance if you saw them in an airport in the United States. But you're both from the United States. You're both Americans. You have something in common. So when people have something in common, they tend to trust other people a lot more, and it makes it a lot easier to have conversations. All right, so once again, I'm in the waiting room. These are things I'm thinking about learning in the waiting room. And of course, I took a glance up at the TV, and even more exciting than watching somebody else's paint dry was the commercial. Now, they had a commercial for, let's see, I wrote it down, Southern New Hampshire University. Now, what is Southern New Hampshire University? It's an online college. And I'm thinking to myself, gee, I wonder what their, you know, who their mascot is. Or I wonder what their, you know, like the Fighting Irish, what are they, the Fighting Modems? You know, what are they? They play their basketball games or their video games. The cheerleaders cheer. What are they? They're on Snapchat. You know, the coaches, when they yell at the referees, what do? Give them emojis, you know, with like this. You know, I'm thinking about Southern New Hampshire University. All right, now, first of all, let me say that all the opinions expressed in this particular video are my own. So if you're going to get ticked off at somebody for that, direct it at me. It's nobody else. My opinion. Eli, you're not going to go, I'm telling you right now, to Southern New Hampshire University. You're going to go to a real college. Why? Because the 4 years of college, and Eli, notice I said 4, I didn't say 6. I ain't paying for 6. Okay? 4 years of college were the absolute best time of my life. It is the time in life when you will know more people than any other time in your life. There are so many different experiences, getting along, meeting new people, from you know, because they have something in common. We talked about that before. They're all going to the university. Some of them are taking the same classes. And you get to meet some very, very interesting people from this end and from that end. And it's just a tremendously exciting experience. All right? So anyway, you're not going to Southern New Hampshire University. Now, I always like to tell people that I got a basketball scholarship to New England Tractor Trailer Training School, that I was the driving force, get it? The driving force behind their first undefeated season. But people see through that right away. And what do you do in a virtual basketball game? After it's over, do you take a virtual shower because you have a virtual date with somebody? But I digress, all right? Anyway, like I said, the college experience was the 4 best years of my life, because not only do you expand intellectually and you're talking to people about things, you know, you're picking your classes, you talk to people about things that, you know, you are interested in, and people that are experts, and some of the professors, several of the professors are writing books, and, you know, it's just a tremendously strong experience. But I digress. One of the things that the main thing that I'm talking about is people being in the waiting room. And once you're in the waiting room, and then finally, after an hour, they call your name, Eli's dad. You jump up like you're a big shot. Hey, that's me. I'm going in to see the doctor. And then what do? They put you inside the little waiting room, the smaller waiting room. And this particular waiting room, because of it's an orthopedic guy, is right next to the x-ray machine. And that's one of the things, that's the reason I'm there, is because it's been a year and the doctor wants to take an x-ray to see that everything is healing properly. Which brings to mind the question, do you do an x-ray of yourself to see your progress from a year ago? Where were you back then? Where did you expect to be? How far have you come? Have you set new goals for yourself for next year? Take an x-ray. It works at the doctor's office. It works in life. These are critically important things. All right? Anyway, I talk about this thing with the waiting room because, as you may know from some of my other videos, it bugs me that people have virtually eliminated humanity, people skills, from their repertoire. Everything that they do is economically based. It's based on the statistics. You were given 5 or more senses, okay? We can have a discussion on that at some other time, but at least 5 senses. The universe intends you to use those senses. The universe intends you to interact with other people. All right, so here's the problem. And it's that people want to take the waiting room with them wherever they go. And this is a quote from a gentleman named Max Igan, I-G-A-N. And I quote, "It's like people are walking around in a daze. All of this technology exists all around them. The old world also still exists all around them, but they're simply not seeing it. Why? Because they can't see outside of the social construct that they have in their minds. They can't see beyond the history that they've been told, that they have been taught. The war that they've been indoctrinated into believing is real." You know, now if you stop and think about our society that's so centered around quote-unquote devices, you know, years ago, Eli, back in the time of the Pilgrims, what was society centered around? It was centered around the church. That was the big place. Then it became the Industrial Revolution, the workplace. So, like, what I'm suggesting is that society continuously, and I use this word very loosely based on my opinion, evolves as the timeline moves forward. So right now we're very based on being the Jetsons with our devices, but that too will change. So my point is, gather some of the skills, the people skills that create interaction, because the same things, the same principles that got people from point A to point B to point C years ago are the same ones that are going to get you from point A to point B to point C today. Those principles meaning being able to be persuasive with people, being able to learn from people. I'm not saying that it's bad to, use your devices, but use them within reason. They are the tools. You are not the tool. They should not control you. You should use them to control things that you want to control. And I'm going to end up my little rant today with my thought for the day, which comes from Voltaire. And Eli, if he were alive today, he'd be the oldest person on the planet. And I quote, "The only certain barrier to truth is the belief that you already have it." And because we will never end one of our meetings on a philosophical note, let's all get out there, talk to our neighbors, and charge! I'm Eli's dad.